topic we're going to open now has a bit of a different opening to it. We're going to discuss digital public goods, digital public infrastructure. Some say the more open, the better. And these are about delivering tailor-made digital governance solutions to those who actually need it. We will proceed with 2 discussions. First, a fireside chat led by our government CIO, and followed by a panel, which I will introduce to you later. But for now, please allow me to invite on stage Luukas Ilves, our government CIO, together with Ben Cerveny and Ville Sirviö. Welcome.
Good afternoon. So as Sandra said, we're going to round out the day with a topic that is really near and dear to Estonian hearts, which is to play on this theme that our minister touched on, how we really go from merely cooperating to building things together. And one of the things that tends to get lost in theoretical and political discussions is a view of best practices and case studies. So what we thought we'd do here is to take 2 positive case studies of how digital public goods are working today, the Foundation for Public Code and NIIS, and just let the directors or the heads of these 2 organizations talk a little bit about what the organizations are, what they do, why they work, and what needs to happen for them to work better. And what I ask you to do is to think of these as 2 case studies of a movement that, in our view, is starting to take hold much more broadly. So as was mentioned yesterday, at the sidelines of this meeting, we've had a number of meetings of the ITU-led GovStack initiative. It's not just the ITU, it's a whole lot of partners, which aims, in a sense, to build digital public goods on a global scale. And I think that the work that the Foundation for Public Code and NIIS have done, in a sense, are trailblazing, where GovStack and others hopefully will follow. And then the idea of the discussion with ministers and Director General that my colleague Nele will lead will effectively be to ask, if these are some positive examples, what can we do to scale this up? But that's all to come. I want to start off by just turning first to Ben, and then to Ville. And first of all, just introduce to us your organization. Starting with Ben, what is the Foundation? Well, who are you? What is the Foundation for Public Code? What do you do?
Well, thank you so much. I have come from a history of working in Silicon Valley and with companies there, and followed sort of the rise of the internet in general as a technology that has sort of suffused all of our activities in the public and private sphere. And through this work, I've sort of slowly moved to the realization that a lot of the things that I considered, initially part of things like Web 2.0 and things that were being offered by the private sector were actually more like infrastructure rather than technology. In fact, one might say that people invent things all the time. For the first 30 years, we call them technology, and then if they work, we call them infrastructure. And we're now at this moment with network services where we're going over this threshold into infrastructure. And when that happens, there are a lot of changes that need to occur around inclusion and accountability and transparency. And so the work that we're doing at the Foundation is really about understanding how to help public organizations collaboratively build adaptable and sustainable open digital public infrastructure. So the idea is that in this work, we're bringing together networks of public administrations that either have built tools for themselves already that they realize that they need to create a system of sharing around in order to keep them sustainable and move them forward into the future, or to find new use cases that multiple public administrations understand the value of pursuing and go into collaborations together in order to achieve. We call this process that we move forward with these products code-based stewardship. And code-based stewardship is kind of a way of bringing a lot of the techniques and tools that were evolved in the private sector that have empowered companies like Google and Facebook to achieve the massive scale of productivity that they have, bringing that into networks of public administrations collaborating. And core to that is the idea that you build a vehicle that these code bases inhabit, which can be an NGO or a department within a public organization that has a shared governance model, that has a way of technically integrating contributions to the code base from many actors, which is a very hard process and is kind of the core, almost a new industrial revolution that's taken place in the private sector already. That's how you have 80,000 programmers working on one code base, for instance, inside of Google or some of these places. This needs to now be translated to a network of public administrations that are procuring services from an ecosystem of support and system integrator vendors to build individual products that then can be taken forward into the future in a coherent way. And so this kind of ecosystem building, the roadmap of feature development, and the system of vendors as a whole become sort of almost like a rhizomatic network of lots of different interdependent actors that it turns out that software at this scale is actually made of people. It's made of a community. A lot of times you'll see code bases that are made in open source and are highly effective for a number of years while the initial funding is there, and then they sort of become a website, with no one active on it. And so what we've realized is really building this system of collaboration, which is really made of the stakeholders within the partnership organizations and the process that moves that forward, both in code bases and community, is how we really advance that. But the sort of core piece of this whole project is something we call the Standard for Public Code, which I have an old-fashioned physical copy here to demonstrate. And this is not an ISO standard, technically, but instead a set of criteria that can be used as a guidance for code bases that realize that they would like to achieve the capability of being replicated by partners and becoming a sustainable project across a network. And so there's, sort of our work often is to work with public administrations who have these tools that they have implemented a lot of times for themselves, but don't necessarily, aren't ready to see the light of day with partners. We help them get to documentation, good product sort of representation, awareness among our network, and then also we use it to evaluate continuously code bases so that they can be, continue to evolve and grow in a way that's useful to everyone. And that also is very much a project of making sure that people are willing to recommit code that they develop on their own after they've replicated it. The real value of open source comes when people merge those changes back into the code base and make sure that there's an ongoing sort of metabolic process of people going off and procuring new parts of the service and then reintegrating those into a product as it goes forward. So we have seen this kind of success happen in many different sectors and a lot of really successful vehicles that accomplish this, of which I think NIIS is one of the primary examples about how this can work successfully. So I'm really happy to be up here on stage with Ville.
Ben, if I can ask you, just a quick follow-up to talk a little bit about the foundation. I know you work a lot with cities. Can you give us an example of a software product or a tool? If I'm the city of Amsterdam, what do I get from you guys besides cool standards?
Cool standards are great, but then also the idea, so Amsterdam has built products like Signala, which is their sort of Open 311-like system, which is about having people use various different messaging strategies to tell the city about problems in the road or things like that they can report. And that code base is now being replicated across other cities, and we're helping them build that sort of framework for collaboration, the literal tools for community building, like messaging applications and forums, also the code base stewardship part of the process of actually running the repositories where the code base is kept and managing how all that stuff is integrated and put out there, but then also help with when they initially built the product, well, not just in this case, but in almost every case with these code bases, they need to be able to explain the value to someone other themselves, because a lot of these public administrations, it is not in their remit to speak with their peers. They're busy helping their citizens. So somebody inside of Amsterdam, once they build a product in open source that is going to do something like, for instance, parking services is another thing that they've built, really a fantastic app that's built on Linux that has cameras attached to cars that read the plates and a touchscreen system that can be installed as a kiosk. And all of this is an open hardware specification, open software, but they didn't have the wherewithal within their Amsterdam city government to go to other cities in the Netherlands, much less elsewhere in the world, to say like, hey, we really would love you to use this tool as well so that we can share the burden of maintaining it and moving it forward with new features. And so it's really this organizational process building, the standing up of a vehicle for a code base is really sort of the whole project.
Cool, so I'm going to turn to Ville now. And maybe full disclosure, I'm on Ville's board for NIIS, as in my capacity as the Estonian government CIO. So we, of course, we're one of your stakeholders, and basically we co-founded you initially with the government of Finland. Well, tell everyone why we started you and what you've been up to.
Yeah, so I guess that everyone in the room knows well the story of Estonian X-Road. So NIIS was originally built upon that story and idea of Estonia's X-Road and Finland joining that collaboration. But actually nowadays it's something much more. So what we talk about with NIIS is a collaboration led by Iceland, Finland and Estonia together. I like to read it in this order once in a while because our members have a neck for stick. So it's truly a European collaboration. We have had developers from several countries. It's really international work we do. And of course, X-Road is our flagship product. It remains as such. We see its strength still. The ecosystem model of X-Road is really unique. And when we talk about X-Road in the context of NIIS, we have to remember that it's actually much bigger than we are. So X-Road is going worldwide strongly. We now have 20 ecosystems deployed around the world. We have a community in which we have over 100 countries represented, over 2,000 members discussing X-Road in our community Slack. And we just counted that the current deployments are actually reaching 200 million end users worldwide. So when we think about the story of X-Road of Estonia as a small nation, so please forget it. It's working in countries with population of 50 plus million and it scales up. So X-Road is definitely the flagship thing. And then we are also working on Harmony e-delivery access. It is our latest product, which is for joining the e-delivery policy domains. And we are just starting up with Harmony, and we are actually looking for more organizations to deploy it and try it out. But anyway, that's the thing we are doing now. So we facilitate the collaboration, we work on the development of X-Road and Harmony e-delivery access. We are doing research with plenty of institutions, including universities, other research organizations. I actually want to mention that we recently published our latest paper, which is European Interoperability Landscape Report. You can find it in our website, niis.org. And it's covering the developments of cross-border data exchange in Europe and what type of initiatives we will see in the future. So yeah, that's how I would summarize NIIS. Plenty of research, development, 2 wonderful products, and we are really happy about X-Road.
One of the things when we talk with other governments about NIIS is there's, of course, 2 layers. We talk about X-Road and how wonderful it is, and by the way, if anyone needs an interoperability tool, it is the best in the world, and NIIS, Ville and I can give you the sales pitch. But there's another layer there, which is, for me, it's a business model of what we've done with X-Road. I mean, if we go back 10 years, it was a piece of software procured by the Estonian government, uniquely for use in Estonia, and we took this leap of faith of saying we're going to, along with Finland initially, hand over the procurement of this core piece of how government in Estonia works to you, and basically let you gather the specs and the requirements from RIA, our agency, the equivalent agencies in Finland and now Iceland, put together the specs. Yes, we have a seat in the board, but basically, let's be very clear, you run the show, and then you get a chunk of money from us, from Finland and Iceland, and you go procure it, and then we have to implement what you've procured. I actually think, sometimes I look back at that and I think it's remarkable that it works. So I don't know if you just, maybe open a little bit just the nuts and the bolts of what that actually looks like from your perspective and what you have to do to keep me and my colleagues, Andrei and Jarkko, happy.
Yeah, I would say that the way how NIIS operates as a non-profit association funded by governments, I think it's an excellent model because it's giving us some of the flexibility needed these days when we work with some digital solutions, software. We operate like a startup, but just avoiding the risks of the startup, so that's a priority for us. But anyway, we are very agile, small organization. We have 5 people on board NIIS, so really small organization, and a development team of 7 to 8 developers working on X-Road. And yes, we organize public procurements to get the vendors to work for us, but we maintain this process, so we own the process. Everything related to development is in our own hands. So we have all the environments, we have all the software needed. So when there is a change of vendor, it is very easy and flexible to go on with the new companies. So I think the way how we operate, it's really an example I would recommend also to others to try out. It's really something that works. On the other hand, I'm sometimes thinking that it's also a bit alerting to see that in this type of work for public sector, we can more easily run things in a non-profit association than the actual administration could, when I hear about how much of different types of limitations there might be in public administration in some cases. So that's also one thing to think about. How could we actually take the best practices also to go throughout the administration in every country? That's also a question. How can we change the old processes?
So a question to both of you. I mean, both NIIS and the Foundation for Public Code, you're doing great things. There are great tools that are coming out of this. Your stakeholders are happy. You've also both been around for a while, and I guess my question is, given that, why don't you each have hundreds of members? You know, what's challenging and what's difficult about scaling up membership or scaling up a product portfolio using this kind of model?
Well, I would say that there is definitely at least from our perspective, working with open tools, there's a lot of, sort of uncertainty about procuring open tools. And I think that is, something that we're getting over. Particularly, I think the foundation plays a part in that process, because a lot of times, there's this issue around service contracts, SLAs, things like that, where it's like, who is responsible for this? What if we implement it? Where is there a there? And this is one of the things that's nice about the model of either, we will be doing stewardship ourselves over, code bases, but also helping form these organizations like NIIS that are piloting these things, that have a governance model, have a technical steering committee. People can sort of have this legibility into what the application actually is and will become, and they understand what their relationship in terms of this, sort of control architecture that you just talked about, they're contributing to and getting back something, and they can recognize what that is in the process. And so I think we've kind of turned a corner recently. I mean, this year, we've heard a lot about digital public goods and digital public infrastructure, and I think it's now, the value of having this type of sharing model is really sort of dawning on people about the possibility for collective activity in the public sector, which may be, interestingly, the final form of open source itself, because for a long time in Silicon Valley, of course, the early days of open source was this kind of hyper-libertarian, sort of you get to control everything yourself model, and now we're kind of have moved into a phase where it's actually, recognizing the fact that almost all public administrations have common goals in what they're doing to serve their citizens and organize their affairs, and that, creates this incredible opportunity to, build very functional tools that go across
I still want to get nuts and bolts. I mean, and we'll get to Ville too in a minute. Like, you're going to a city, a country that is doing open source, and you're saying, join my framework and come on board. What are the things that hamper that or get in the way?
Well, I mean, if you're talking to technical resources, often it's the sort of not invented here paradigm of like taking on, like this, the sort of risk that you guys shared in taking on code bases from each other, from Finnish and Estonian government, and to enter larger collaborations. There's a similar issue of, especially among G7 countries that feel like they need to maintain agency over what it is that they're putting out there as service architectures. And so this idea of building the trusted connectivity, which is the theme here obviously today, is about doing the hard work, which is to build the trust between these agencies that are doing the generation of code bases that can then do that. But we haven't yet reached that threshold where the comfort is there to say, like, oh, we understand the value of this.
We were talking before about the work you're doing on notify frameworks, which Liam, I don't know if he's in the room right now, invented 10 years ago. Anyways, I was going to give Liam a shout out. But so, talk a little bit about that as an example of some of these challenges.
Well, there are a number of tools that GDS, as the government digital services in the UK government, was a leading sort of provider of citizen-facing services. They launched a whole series of reforms in their sort of tooling of these systems about 10 years ago now, and those, for a long time, were sort of the most recognized before, I think, Estonia's arrival on the scene as an e-state. The GDS was often referred to as the kind of blue chip, sort of reference implementation. And so now the realization is that, a lot of these tools serve the similar needs for other countries, and so we've been talking to the people at GDS. Well, GDS has already replicated, the code base of Notify has replicated to the Canadian government and now to the US government and others. And this process, we're in a critical moment as these, what we call forks are happening. People are downloading the code base and implementing it. And the question is, can we form an international community that then does the second half of that, which is the merge, which means that they're going to all start improving the service and meeting the needs of their own citizens, which makes the tool overall more adaptive. And then those things, if they can be returned to a core code base that represents Notify as a global resource, then that is even more useful for the next set of potential implementers when they come along.
It's a challenge of not just sharing, but actually making sure that as we share, we keep moving together. So, Ville, I mean, you're shepherding a community formally of 3, but really, as you said, of 20.
Yeah.
How are you keeping them together?
Yeah, it's a few things that I wanted to also touch in Ben's comments. So first, you mentioned the must be built here thing. Mm-hmm. I'm really happy you mentioned it because that's also very familiar to us. And if I think about X-Road and NIIS and how we get to work with new governments or new organizations and how we get X-Road used worldwide, I find that it's pretty easy outside of Europe to find good use for X-Road. But in Europe, it's getting more difficult because NIIS is built around X-Road and the governments are evaluating how much is the likeliness that they might utilize X-Road or not. And getting someone to join an organization which is investing in one product, it's getting more difficult in that way. So as Luukas knows well, we are discussing the alternatives for the future of having different products, like a portfolio of products and having possibilities for different types of developments, because we have seen that the NIIS model works well. So it is just a question, which products should we have? Should we have an increasing number of different types of digital solutions, software, whatever it is? And what we still have learned with X-Road is that we have the community, and we find that the open source role of X-Road is really important, also for our members directly, because what we get through it is lots of user feedback. We get information from around the world about how it should be developed in the future. We get really valuable contributions occasionally, not as much as we would like to, but anyway, we get. And about the open source role, I would add that if I think about the discussions I'm having in Europe about X-Road and about open source in general in digital government, I think European governments often say that we love open source, we like it, we want to promote open source, we want open source, whatever. But what it means is that you do the same project as before, you release as open source, but one step is missing, reusing. So checking what already exists. So had plenty of discussions during several years, hearing the same story. One country is developing API catalog, service catalog, digital mailbox, data exchange platform. All things are exactly the same, but it must be built here. And that is the European dilemma. If I look what's happening in Latin America, for example, it's very fast deployments of X-Road. They take a solution, they deploy it effectively, and they are happy with it. So I'm just asking that, do we have too much of criteria in Europe? Are we too happy building things? I don't know. You can decide what is the reason behind it, but this is how I find it. It's, I think we have more space for working together in Europe, finding solutions together, building together, sharing, reusing open source software.
This is a question that I hope the next panel with Mario and Ivan and Veronica can look at critically. Yeah. But just to pick on you a little bit more, I mean, have there, within the community that you have, I mean, have there been tensions here where you've got a situation where you've got different stakeholders with different requirements? What's the business case look like? I mean, clearly there are returns to scale, but it must be the case that 3 countries or 20 has some overhead that you don't have with one country building it. So if you kind of had to reduce the business case for X-Road or for Harmony e-delivery into a 3-sentence pitch, how would you do that?
Yeah, actually, you gave me 2 questions at once.
Yeah. For doing the products together, I should say, not for the products themselves.
Yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to mention about the community related to that question, when NIIS started in 2017 in autumn, I met with some people who say that they don't believe NIIS exists next spring. And I was asking, why is that? Because they didn't believe that 2 countries could actually agree on the business case and the requirements and finally make it work that way in the future. And Then I've heard the same story about the community. So people saying that, oh, but you have the global community. How can you get these people to do the thing together? Because they have so different needs. What has been the lesson to me is that actually people have quite similar needs. We are just imagining that everyone is so different. They have totally different things they would love to do. No, it's all the same. So what we find is that X-Road has the real business case in providing the best available solution in the market for building your ecosystem for data exchange. I repeat, ecosystem. It's not about technology. So often we end up discussing technology. When we go and talk about X-Road, it's typical to get some counter-argument or idea that it should be built differently or there should be some of the latest technologies involved. Typical question is there blockchain in X-Road or whatever? But it's not about the technology side, it's about the ecosystem side, the concept, the model which is working, how you manage your national ecosystem, how you run the processes, how you make the administration work smoother and finally effectively and saving money. And that is the business case of X-Road.
Well, I was just going to say that part of what this kind of distributed kind of ecosystem and community model, community of practice around an application and this shared roadmap means that you do go into procurement in your local economy to build out specific work packages from the roadmap. And so in that way, that sort of overcomes a little bit of this, the not invented here problem, because you develop literacy in the application. I think a lot of people are afraid that they won't have the, excuse me, they won't have the native capacity to actually pull off the changes that they're hoping to make to the code base if they don't have people locally. And so having an economic ability to bring, to focus your procurement on the changes that you want, you can make something like a distribution, essentially. Like, some applications when they propagate, excuse me, OpenFisca is a open financial management application that moves from country to country, and when it enters a country, the first replicator in that country has to make some changes that comply with whatever the financial administration requirements are in that country. But now you have a distribution that means the next city or the next state inside of that framework of requirements now can replicate faster. And so you end up with these things that are not necessarily forks, but they're streams that are maintained. They each have a sub-community of people that are working on a distribution that is right for their environment. And so then it's an interesting also to see policy, in some ways, part of our sort of theoretical understanding of what the reason why we call it public code is it's actually the convergence in some ways of policy and code. A lot of times, what these code bases represent are the implementations of policy, and that's part of the reason why it's important that they're open, because of course the policy was generated in this open and deliberative way, and then if you go and stash the functionality of that into a black box that's controlled by a third party, it's kind of hard to say that you've delivered on the sort of the democratic intentions of what the policy generation process was supposed to guarantee in the first place. So, but the idea that then you have this open model of how all of these different services work in their different distributions helps you kind of understand the different ways in which states engage with their own citizens or with their own process, because it's not just a policy model, but it's a functional demonstration of the differences that happen in software.
So just to round things up, if I can ask you both for 30 seconds to dream a little bit, if there were one thing that policymakers or government CIOs could do to, besides just joining you guys, to enable you and to make your lives more interesting and make you more successful, what would it be?
Well, I think the main thing for me is the understanding that software is a process, it's not a thing, and this is really about the movement between procurement of software as OpEx versus rather than CapEx. The idea that you have operational expenditure, which is ongoing, which is what this stewardship process is about, which is the sort of learnings that we've brought from Silicon Valley about continuous integration, is that the software is alive. It's a thing that needs to keep going, and that keeping going is both about recognizing this type of continuous expenditure and also the need to participate in a community. And I think this trusted connectivity is really the other ingredient that we need, is just making sure that inside of this framework of understanding that we're all working toward the same goals, now it's going to be much easier to commit to collaborative projects in this way, because this was the not invented here factor has been transcended.
Ville?
Yeah, if I was thinking that if there's one sort of dream that I could share to this audience, it is that the European governments would start increasingly using open source solutions that already exist instead of reinventing the wheel. We have our wonderful X-Road waiting, but it's not the only thing. So we can see plenty of good solutions available, and instead of building it again, it's best to look what exists in the market. That would be my dream.
That's a great dream.
Good, and in the 30 seconds that remain, the commitment I will make to both of you as the Estonian government CIO is that I want to be the best possible customer you can have, but also a demanding customer. And so Ville knows this anyways, but also for Ben, hold my feet to the fire. I know there are tools and products you have that, or that you're stewarding that we're not using right now. I know we're speaking with several of the governments in this room about how we could reuse some of the tools and the code they have. I'll admit, the not invented here, even for us, is challenging sometimes because the reasons, they're not in the abstract not invented here. They're often very legitimate and real concerns about how is the code base now, what is the roadmap, does it fit together with our architecture? So we shouldn't belittle those concerns, but I think my commitment, and I hope that of other governments here, is to work in that direction because I think for us, the upside, if we can get it right, is so clear, which is, for all the other things, you can reduce stuff sometimes in a very simple way to resources. The overall public sector expenditure on ICT in the world is about $600 billion or euros. Of that, OECD countries make up far more than half. If we can take even a small fraction of that and put it into these tools, we'll end up with much more cost-effective, much more interoperable, and therefore, I think, ultimately, much better connected public services. And I think this is something we haven't talked about now, but I hope the panel that comes will touch on this, which is that when we're running on the same code base and using the same tools, it's not just that those tools are cheaper, it's that all the applications, the private sector applications on top of that, the CivTech applications on top of that, end up also porting more easily and bringing our societies closer together. So with that, we're over time. Thank you, gentlemen, both of you, very much for sharing.
Thank you.
And now I hope to our esteemed other governmental leaders who are about to come up here, we look forward to your thoughts on how we can make this happen. Thank you. Thanks.
If you don't mind coming with me for a second, I have a secret to tell you. No, actually asking, I don't know if you followed this panel where Liam Maxwell was as well, and he said, we have 800 government services available or digital services available, and 600 of them are almost identical. Do you have a key how to fix this?
Well, this is exactly the issue, and I think that's an opportunity, right? That they already have a catalog of these types of services. Almost every state that's built open services has a catalog of these things that they're trying to begin to offer up to other states. And as we were just saying, it's about building the community of awareness and the instinct to reach for those, to reach for reuse, is something that is not instinctive yet among the digital transformation ministries. But I think that this, this type of environment is a place where we can instill that inspiration in people.
So we could do something about it.
Yeah, I think we're doing it right now.
Okay, so if you come with me, we'll come back together later.
Okay.
Thank you.